So today I'm very excited to introduce you to Dr. Hassina Kajee, who among many things is the medical director and co-founder of the Nutrition Network. And I'm just so honoured that you are a part of the summit and able to talk to me today. Thank you so much.
You broke up there a little bit, Tracy, but thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It was a great honor. I love just meeting women, especially who are so passionate about health. So thank you very much. And thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing on your side of the world.
Oh, thank you. Yes, of course. So you're in South Africa, so the internet might be a little dodgy. It's coming from a long way away, but hopefully we'll get through it fine. But yeah, look, I think what I love as well is that there is so many women across the world at grassroots level just doing amazing things. And, you know, your work particularly, just before I ask you to share a little bit about you and why you're here, I just thought I'd share when I first came across you. So obviously I've done a few of the Nutrition Network courses, and it must have been, I think it was the first one on low carb ketogenic nutrition, and you were sharing how you know, you did change your career because of what you were saying, and it was almost like, you know, you're getting people at a point where they were just falling off a cliff. It was too late, and you wanted to look and really try and help people before it got to that point, you know, when they're in hospital with chronic diseases and things like that. But the way you shared it, you know, it had so much heart and so much feeling. And I do remember actually crying while I was watching your lecture. It just touched me so much. And I think in medicine, there are so many people like yourself with so much heart and who care so much about people. So thank you. And I just wanted to share that, you know, I was very, very touched when I first met you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Yeah, so, you know, just to go to your question about what brought me to low carb, it really was, I think from the very beginning, I've always been interested in root cause. And that's just the way my mind works, going to root cause. And the one thing that I couldn't come to terms with was I loved engaging with my patients, but the way I watched medicine being practiced by many doctors who mean well, you know, I saw some of my mentors trying to connect, but the number of patients is just overwhelming. And then when you see that your own staff members, the nurses, are younger and sicker, and, you know, just the ability to connect with patients and this kind of disjunct that doctors didn't quite believe that patients could understand the nitty-gritties put in a more practical form. And so I think that led me to chatting to patients in the high care as they recovered and seeing the light bulb switch on. It made me realize that we're really, we don't really realize how much our patients are willing to do for their own health. We're making huge assumptions for them, and that was just not enough for me. So yes, that's where my journey changed, and it was really difficult. I'm finding that coming up right now because I'm hospital-based. My training is in emergency medicine. I'm trained to spot the diagnosis, to see the patient as the patient's walking in the door and know, is this an emergency or not? And to start picking up clues about what's going on in this patient's life. So for me, with the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment, I'm having a lot of FOMO because that's the way that I've been trained. And it feels like all of my colleagues are in this battle and I'm not really at the front line. So it has been something I've had to go through and figure out why and what it's all about. So I do still have a great love for hospital-based medicine. So it was a very big and difficult decision to leave that type of practice and to jump into a type of practice that was quite foreign. It was quite foreign to me, which is preventative medicine, because I love the adrenaline. But I had to do it because it was a deeper calling. And even though it was so difficult and such a huge challenge for me to do something that was scary, but something that I believed in, and I still believe in it deeply. And this is the reason why we put the Nutrition Network together, because learning is ongoing. Everybody is learning all over the world. And we wanted to we didn't want people to feel alone and struggling. We wanted to connect. We realized that, with Prof. Noakes's following, we realized that there were lots of people looking for material, reading the latest articles, or looking for the latest books that were out there. And every time an email came in, it sounded like people were alone. And we really wanted to create the community, to realize that you actually have strength, you're backed by science, you have doctors and nurses and practitioners around the world who believe in this. It's real food. There are results that are immediate. And so that was how the Nutrition Network was actually founded. That was one of the major reasons why we founded the Nutrition Network.
Yes, I'm so glad that you did. So glad that you did. So in terms of your personal low carb journey, was it just in you learning the research and seeing it in your patients that made the difference in you? Because I know you practice this yourself. I follow you on, Facebook, and your children are low carb as well. So was there anything personal there for you in terms of a health story, or is it just, you saw the research and that was that?
So I'm a bit of an idealist. So if I have to do something, I have to do it properly. And if I'm going to prescribe or suggest something to my patients, then I must have tried it out myself, be it a vitamin or a way of eating or fasting or sleeping or whatever it is. And so my side of the family, I have a family history of diabetes. It's really mild. It definitely is, in the traditional terms of treating diabetes, it can be controlled with diet. Traditionally, before we started practicing low carb, the way doctors are trained, you first try to adjust the diet, and then you start to add pills and then insulin. So just by a little bit of monitoring would have been fine. My husband's side of the family, there's also some diabetes and heart disease. And so for us, we were, before we had kids, we would run about 6 times a week. We live in the mountainous area, so we'd be running up the mountains, or we did spin classes every day. And despite that, and we ate the healthy diet, the whole grain, very little processed food. Really, aside from the grain and the occasional pasta, there was really not much we weren't focusing on fat, but we weren't eating badly. And my husband actually struggled. When I met him, he was about 114 kilos. He's now 81 kilos. And he's big boned. He's quite like big boned, as they would say. And so he carried his adiposity quite well. So you never really realized how overweight he was. Despite him exercising so frequently and so hard, he could not get beyond 96 kilos no matter what he did. And he would snore. And it was a huge issue because our sleep is so important. And what happened was that we tried, as the new information was coming up. And then when my son was born, both my kids were sugar-free and, really healthy eaters from the first year. But when my son was born, it suddenly, I don't know what it was, it dawned on me because his body looked like his dad. And my father-in-law had he doesn't mind me mentioning this, he had his first heart attack in his early 30s. So when I had a son whose body type looked a certain way, and I knew at that point, I'd done some reading around insulin resistance, and I knew it was a genetic issue. It was a no-brainer. So at that point, we decided we were going to, what actually precipitated it was that being the anti-sugar person I was even before this, for my daughter's 3rd birthday, we had a Hansel and Gretel party, and I was into the whole fondant cake. And we bought her a little playhouse and covered it with Wonder bars and Tex and all the horrible stuff that we don't eat anymore, all the colored orange and green sweets and chocolates. It was, and that, I think, having all of that, those sweets, we have a shopping center called Macro where you bulk buy in South Africa. So we just bought bulk packets of sweets. And I think after giving away the third packet, and there was still packets of sweets in the house, a big, large bag of sweets, I had enough. And I said, this is going to be the last time that we eat this type of stuff ever. Yeah, and so that was really a personal journey. When I was pregnant with my daughter, she's 8 now, towards the end of my pregnancy, even though I've always been pretty slim, towards the end of my pregnancy, I had some sugar in my urine. And that was just from eating, having the odd hot chocolate. And so I realized that there is a strong genetic predisposition. So being the idealist that I am, we had to go, full 100%, 150%. And my husband then lost, after starting our journey, he went from 96 kilos to 85 kilos within about a couple of months, 2 months. The snoring stopped almost immediately. On the first couple of snoring, and I realized that there's a scientific method to this. There's a specific weight that beyond which I know if he starts to have more dairy and he goes half a kilo over, I know by the snoring. And so I'll say, you need to check yourself because you started snoring again.
That's great. I love that. Well, before I ask you about your summit talk, I just was hoping you might be able to share a little bit around your Eat Better South Africa campaign that you're very passionate about, because I find it it's very interesting, and I think it's fantastic because it's really helping so many people, and I know a lot of women who are in the poorer parts of South Africa to, I guess, overcome a lot of potential barriers around lifestyle change and eating real food. Are you able to share, why you started that and what are some of the things that are coming out of that?
Sure, and thanks for bringing that up. That's so important to me, and it's probably, I've struggled to figure out whether Nutrition Network or Eat Better South Africa is more important to me. They're equally important. It was a big part of leaving the public health service that I was in. The reason I left is because there wasn't room within public health for me to practice the type of medicine that I practice now. When I was pregnant with my son, I was introduced to Jane Boulin, and she was the new CEO of the Noakes Foundation, and someone called Eodia Sampson, who's a local actress in South Africa. And all three of us were looking for ways to get the banting movement, which was seen as a very elite movement at the time, into the communities, because we all practiced it. We believed it could be done. From my professional perspective, those were my patients that were coming into, so I knew the community. Not that particular community where we started in Ocean View, but I knew I had experience in the way of life, in the challenges, in how people would accept the new information and what the alternative was. So the alternative would be that they would either be seen by a dietitian or not, because the obesity obviously is just it's such a pandemic that our dietitians at times don't have room in their practices for anybody with an obese problem. So they make handouts. And then at one point, I couldn't find a handout. I was desperate, looking for somebody who needed some information because they were going home, they were being discharged. And I phoned the dietitian at this particular hospital I worked at and said, well, will you be able to see her in your clinic? And she said, I'm sorry, I don't see anybody in my clinic because I just don't have the capacity. There's just one of me. So I said, okay, well, could I have a handout? She says, well, I'll have to come and give it to you because I don't make handouts anymore, because they're in the ward boxes and then the nurses take them to give to their family members, and so we don't have any. It hit me like a ton of bricks how much need there was. And so what was so overwhelming for me was that very first meeting that we had in the community with Prof. Noakes and the Nutrition Network, the Noakes Foundation. And it was the very first time as a doctor that I was standing in front of a group of people who they were riveted, they were absorbing every word that I said. They were there because they wanted to improve their health. My experience before that was that I would be in a clinic almost pleading with the patient to stop eating bread, doing a whole, what do you eat usually? How many liters of Coke do you drink? Okay, well, trying to explain, this was way before the Banting days, just trying to explain to people about the importance of food. And it felt like I was pouring my heart out, and it was not being received. It was not something that I was talking to the wrong audience. And for the first time, I stood before a group of people, and I was so moved to see the interest on a Saturday morning, and the vulnerability, because these were people who are obviously ill and overweight. It takes extreme vulnerability for, I think, men more than women to come into a predominantly women's group and say, I have an issue, I need help. And I think the response that we got from that very first intervention was so amazing. People said that they spent less money on food than they normally do. We were able to get the budget down to under 30 Rand a day. So that's, I don't know how much that is in dollars at the moment, but it's probably around $2 or less a day. And even in, and that's for all the meals. And that wasn't with fasting. These were just brand new banters or low carbers. And the types of meals, and then it just took on a life of its own, and the community grew, and they we have a WhatsApp group, and they were starting to engage with each other and saying things like, oh, there's someone selling offcuts of salmon or whatever, and it's on special, so everybody would go and buy it, and somebody would say someone's eggs are on special, or coconut oil is on special. But we took them back. It was easy because the community said, this is how we used to live. We used to buy fat from the butcher and render it and use that. We never bought oil. You're right, this is all new. We used to eat liver and brain and chicken feet, and we don't do that. Why don't we do that anymore? And so creating that community was what allowed the community to thrive. And having done that, Eat Better South Africa has been doing interventions around the Western Cape and in parts of Johannesburg. Now, obviously, lockdown has changed that for us, but it's shown us even more what the need is. We're in the process of adapting our intervention to an online off-site program, kind of ushered in by lockdown. But it's also helpful because there are other challenges within these communities like drugs and violence, and so it becomes a safety issue of getting into the communities at times. That's been one of the big challenges that we faced. So lockdown's been good for that reason too. So hopefully we can try and pilot a remote version of the interventions that we do. But it's really just been shocking to see that this can be done on any budget, anywhere in the world, and it's sustainable. We did a study 2 years after the fact, after the first intervention, sorry, it wasn't 2 years. Was it? I'm losing my mind. It was 3 or 4 years after, and the people who were in the second group were actually from the very first group and had continued on that life plan. Some of the people in the second group, in the study group, were joining having continued, and their reason for joining was to help motivate people in their community because it was working so well for them.
So they were going on to become teachers themselves.
Absolutely.
You know, how amazing. It must be just an incredible feeling to be able to help people in that fundamental way. Well, you know, it's a fundamental right, isn't it, to be able to have access to real food. And I think it is incredible, and I wish you all the best, and I hope it keeps going and just grows, and it's fantastic. So in terms of your contribution to our little summit, so I was hoping you could share a little bit about what your summit presentation will be about.
So my summit presentation, I think, is a really important topic at the moment. Obviously, everybody is not a COVID-19 expert. Everybody is reading and consuming, and you have to, personally, I've had like days of reading exhaustively for 10 days and then not being able to read anything again for 10 days. And so I thought this is a really important time for us in the low carb world. This information that we've been practicing, putting into practice, teaching, trying to teach our colleagues, trying to support our patients through, or our clients through, it's absolutely at the forefront right now. When we look at the numbers of patients, younger, not the older generation, or not the older age groups, but people who are having a severe form of COVID-19 and requiring intubation and ICU admission, a large chunk of that are patients who are obese, patients who have diabetes. And I think that this is the time that, without scaring people need to be empowered about obesity, that it's not just a cosmetic thing. It's not a padding. It's not just insulation. Obesity and the adipose tissue is an actual organ, and the more that organ grows, the more damage it can do, and it does within the body. So that's what my talk starts with. It talks about the adipose tissue as an inflammatory, as an endocrine organ and a source of inflammation, of chronic inflammation. These patients are, their immune systems are already heightened before they get coronavirus infection. And there are lots of irregularities within the immune system, which is why they're responding so violently to the virus. There's a lot that we can do with nutrition, especially. And so that's why I chose to talk about this, to teach people that you can actually make changes to your immune system by reducing your sugar. So the second part of the talk will be about diabetes and the different ways that our immune system is affected. I go into briefly the immune system, and because it's something that's I'm really passionate about. It's a very elegant system of how it's all put together, and I thought that was really important right now. A lot of the times we want to support people in our families who are not eating well, and just saying to somebody that's not good for you is not good enough. But if you're empowered and you know why it's not good for you, if you can say to somebody how your white blood cell is affected by eating that sugary donut, and further on what that does to your risk of contracting this virus, I think it's the best time to learn right now, because we can see in real time the effects. When you say to people, if you keep eating this, you will gain weight, and you'll have this percentage risk of developing diabetes. And then once you have diabetes, these are the things that can happen. It's not real to them. It's not happening right now. They cannot fathom that happening. Everybody's in denial. But when you see the real stats coming out right now of COVID-19, younger people with obesity, diabetes that are being admitted with a severe form of COVID, many demising, then perhaps it's more real for people now. Perhaps this is what is needed for people to start to realize that we haven't really been looking after ourselves well, and perhaps that's the motivation that people need. I practice a very empathetic approach, compassionate approach towards healthy lifestyle. Many people just don't know, or people are struggling, and we just need to try and figure that out and meet people where they're at. And I think that when we're able to do that, then we have a more willing audience, and people who feel less judged, and able to hear us instead of being defensive.
I love that. I absolutely can't wait for your talk. I'm sure there's probably going to be some, medical terminology in there, but I think, it's going to be overall just so important to understand, all about our immune system, how it is impacted, and how this stuff does play out in our health. Because, you're right. I just don't think many people don't really understand that connection. Even argue that food has no impact on the immune system, but yeah, I think it does very, very clearly. For my last question, I'm hoping we could take it back maybe to your personal, with your family, because I know that, as I said, that your family is low carb. So one of the questions I get a lot is, look, low carb's not sustainable. So I'd love your take on what does make it sustainable. What has made it sustainable for you, and what do you see in your patients around that as well?
So that's an easy question and a difficult question. For me, it's an easy question, but in my practice, I can see that there are many challenges depending on the person. It's something that I've been pondering. What makes the successful? What are the personality? What are the facets of personality or traits that a person has who will be successful? More so for me to figure out where somebody isn't going to make it. So for me, it's actually because I'm so busy, and it's a non-negotiable for me. I need to have quick answers. I'm not going to find those answers in the shops. And so there are multitude. So my kids know that there's certain non-negotiables. So they've known for their entire lives that we don't eat colorants and we don't eat added sugar. And if you're going to have honey, you're only allowed a quarter teaspoon. And if you're eating something like a date or a raisin, you're having one, or you're having a couple. They know that. And my son loves bananas. So we do eat a little bit of fruit, but he knows to cut his banana in half and save it for the next day, because Mom, it has 7 teaspoons of sugar, and that's way too much sugar for me. My soldiers are going to get too sick, and I need healthy soldiers. So it's about kind of teaching your children and instilling within them a love for food as you go along, but not depriving them of the beauty. And food is delicious. We love food. And we're always in the kitchen, and we're always making new things. So if they absolutely, I don't like doing the replace this with that. So I don't like doing we need cereal, so we must have a low carb cereal. I've gone through those phases, and they don't actually work. So what we do instead is we do the other approach, which is, what do you absolutely love? So my son loves cheese, so he gets cheese. There's always cheese in the fridge. I love dark chocolate, so there's always 85% or higher content dark chocolate around in the house. We love oily fish. We love eggs. Thank goodness we love eggs. And so I try to change eggs turn them into different forms, turn them into pancakes, omelets, pizzas, just keep playing with it and getting the kids involved. I love batch cooking. And so if I'm going to make egg cups, I put something in that will entice them, like salami, something that they love for the flavor, so that it makes it easier to have it for yet another lunchbox or something like that. And so if I'm making muffins, or I make sure that they're very high egg content and as few ingredients as possible, and then batch cooking. that includes suppers. So we would batch cook on a Sunday, and have enough food for Monday, Tuesday, and just change up the veggies, you know. And I find that having those options, having a freezer full of things, and knowing as you're running out that you need to batch bake another batch of egg cups, or I've got a specific butcher that I go to that will make my free from salami and free from Viennas and free from sausage and patties, and then I'll buy mince and make meatballs, and then we've got some tuna in the cupboard, and so it's all real food. We're not trying to turn things. We do have the fathead pizza and all the recipes, and we do that now and then. Sometimes I see a recipe and I have to try it immediately, and that's what I do. That's just the way I am. And sometimes I like to play around and make my own things, and sometimes they're massive flops, but that's okay. That's a learning curve for me. So for me, the bottom line is start with what you love. If you love fish, if you love chops, if you love, what are your top 10 things that you must have? Always try and have that around. Always plan ahead. Whether it's snacks for the kids, sometimes you're really busy and you haven't had a chance to get lunch together. And if you've got some seed crackers and cheese or nut butter, you're good to go. I find that with our kids, having a solid breakfast that is usually egg or protein based, so meat, protein, or something like that. Once they've had a really lovely breakfast, there's very little need for eating in the day. We've just come out of the month of Ramadan, and my 8-year-old fasted, and it was also something for me to watch, because I made sure she had a good protein, healthy fat meal, pre-dawn meal, and there was no complaining about hunger or thirst, because I made sure she had her drinks as well. And then with my son, who's 5 and wasn't fasting, he would have his breakfast, and because because nobody was eating, there was no reminder that he needed to eat. And so he would go through most of the day, and by 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon would now start to look for something. What I found with online schooling, with the lockdown, is that the kids would have a massive breakfast, but because the teacher said it's now your snack time, they would come to me 2 hours later and say, "Mom, we need to eat now." And that's not normal for what I know. So it's just highlighting how habits and timing can play a huge role with what you need to eat. But I think it's infinitely sustainable. We're seeing that in our poorer communities, that people, once they learn what they need to remove and they learn the options of what's available, all protein, the whole animal, any part of the animal, all good fats, certain vegetables, certain nuts. We don't push for anything expensive. But once people have had their full on something that's relatively cheaper, like sardines and eggs, and you give them the tools and how to prepare it in various ways, and you show that you yourself enjoy this type of food, it becomes easier for people to just embrace that and keep doing it.
Awesome, lovely, fantastic tips. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to see you face to face and chat to you, and I can't thank you enough for being involved in the summit. Your presentation sounds hugely important. I can't wait to see it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tracy, and all the very best with the last few days before we go live.
I know, exciting, almost here. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.